The largest immigration detention center in the United States is getting first responders called in nearly every single day, not because of riots or because of escapes, but because of self harm from the detainees, with some successful attempts. Over 130 emergency 911 calls have been called into one ICE detention center in the last 5 months. And the calls describe people suffering from seizures, fights with other detainees, severe medical emergencies, and suicide attempts. One detainee even reported hearing guards bet on which detainee was going to commit suicide next. Today, we're going to be breaking down what's happening inside the largest ICE detention facility in the country and why members of Congress are now demanding answers. The story comes from newly released emergency call records obtained by reporters, and according to those documents, staff at a massive ICE detention complex near Fort Bliss called 911 more than 130 times in 5 months. That's nearly one emergency call every single day. And those calls describe detainees experiencing suicide attempts, seizures, injuries from fights, severe medical crises, and even a pregnant woman experiencing extreme pain. According to reporting from the Associated Press, the calls paint a picture of a detention center constantly struggling with mental health crises and medical emergencies. If you want to read the full reporting behind these emergency calls, go to the Associated Press article linked right here. And it really details how emergency responders were repeatedly called to the camp as detainees suffered serious crises. Every day felt like a week, every week felt like a month, and every month felt like a year, said Owen Ramsey, former property manager in Columbia, Missouri, who spent several weeks in the camp before his deportation in February to the Netherlands. Camp East Montana was 1,000 times worse than prison. The facility itself is ginormous. It holds nearly 3,000 people at the same time, and instead of traditional buildings, most detainees are held in overcrowded tents. Many of the people that spoke to reporters described conditions including unsanitary bathrooms and showers, insect infestations, limited access to medical care, and insufficient food. Some detainees say that they rarely saw sunlight and that they were only allowed outside about once or twice a week. Public health concerns have also been reporting inside the facility, including cases of measles and tuberculosis. That combination of overcrowding, poor sanitation, lack of medical access and food and water is the exact environment where diseases run rampant. And perhaps the most disturbing allegation is what some detainees hear from the guards themselves. According to reporting from Mother Jones, one detainee said they heard guards betting on which detainee would die from suicide next. Owen Ramsey, a legal permanent resident who spent several weeks at the Camp East Montana detention facility in Texas, told Associated Press that they overheard a security guard talking about a betting pool for which detainee would die by suicide. The guard said that he had paid $500 into the pot, which would all go to the winner with the most accurate predictions on detainees harming themselves. Without providing details, the Department of Homeland Security spokesperson told AP that Ramsey, who was brought to the US at age 5 from the Netherlands, was lying about suicide bets. One of the most common political arguments for justifying continued ICE presence and the expansion of detention centers is that these centers are holding some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. But the data says that that is outright false. Even from ICE's own metrics, the people that they are detaining, only about 20% of them have a criminal record. That means 80% of the people being detained have no criminal record other than not having proper paperwork in this country. And we are subjecting them to these types of conditions in some of the worst detention facilities in the country. Many of those who have been detained were done so in large scale enforcement sweeps, and most of them have lived in the United States for decades without posing any threat to other constituents. Immigration detention is not supposed to function like a prison sentence. In theory, this is supposed to be a temporary administrative detention while people's immigration processes are currently being processed. But in practice, in Trump's America, people can spend months, if not years, inside of these facilities. The Guardian recently reported on conditions inside another ICE detention facility near El Paso, where detainees described similar overcrowding and medical concerns. The Texas Congresswoman Veronica Escobar has toured the camp several times and has repeatedly demanded its closure. This facility should not be operational. It feels like this contractor is reinventing the wheel and people are losing their lives in their experiment, she said. She said the facility had temporarily cut its population to less than 1,900 when she visited last month and will be closed to visitors temporarily because of a measles outbreak. On one visit, a female detainee showed Escobar a meager serving of scrambled eggs that were served still frozen in the middle. She learned detainees protested after they had stopped receiving juice, fruit, and milk with their meals. Escobar met with detainee from Ecuador who said her arm had been broken during a violent arrest during immigration agents in Minnesota. Weeks later, the congresswoman could still see the fractured bones in his forearm poking up under the skin. Escobar called for an investigation into contractor Acquisition Logistics LLC, which was awarded a contract worth up to $1.3 billion to build and operate the camp. People should be moved by the abject cruelty, but if they're not, I hope they're moved by the fraud and corruption, Escobar said. Keep in mind that the Trump administration is filled with the same people who say, we can't afford universal health care. We can't afford to build public infrastructure for the people that already live here. But we can't afford to build detention facilities that house 80% of which of people that have no criminal record. $1.3 billion dollars to torture people in these concentration camps. A required federal inspection found more than 60 violations of detention standards in this facility. But here's the problem: the inspection report has never been released publicly, which means most people don't even know the full scope of these violations that were discovered inside the camp. And now some members of Congress are calling for the facility to be shut down entirely and for a full investigation into the contractors that are running it and stealing taxpayer money. Other medical emergencies included seizures, chest and heart problems, according to AP's review of 130 calls made after the camp's opening in mid August through January 20th. It's not easy in here psychologically, said detainee Roland Kusi, 31, who said she fled Cameroon in 2022 to escape political violence. You just keep thinking, like all the time, you're thinking and thinking for a solution. It's really mentally draining. Immigration authorities arrested him in Chicago in September at an appointment with his wife, a member of the Army National Guard, to register their marriage in pursuit of legal residency for him. He was quickly shipped to El Salvador. A Cuban immigrant in his 50s told the AP he requested to receive his medication for diabetes, high blood pressure, and an enlarged prostate during a 6 week detention at Camp East, Montana, but it never arrived. He spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of reprisals. Immigration detention is often talked about in abstract political terms in the United States. Things like border policy, enforcement strategy, national security. But these 911 calls tell a very different story than the ones the Trump administration are lying to the American people about. It reveals the human reality in a lot of these detention facilities, where people are experiencing medical emergencies, lack of proper care, and desperation severe enough to attempt suicide. And they raise a fundamental question. If the largest immigration detention facility in the United States is calling 911 almost every single day, what does that say about the system of detention itself? Because if the goal of immigration detention is to simply hold people while their cases are being processed and moved through the courts, it's worth asking why this process now appears to involve daily emergencies and repeated humanitarian crises. People that don't commit criminal violations in this country should not be subjected to these types of conditions. We have an Eighth Amendment. And if anybody respects the Constitution, we cannot continue to put people in instances of cruel and unusual punishment for simply not having paperwork.